Hi everyone, I'm Omar from Browner Sound in Miami, Florida. We're a pro tech shop servicing all the major recording studios down here. We work on vintage gear and we build custom and our own proprietary stuff. Today we wanted to talk about 500 series rack enclosures and the things you should be thinking about before getting started. So what is a 500 series? Well, the 500 series module was developed by API in the 1970s. The idea was that the large format console had modules that you could take out and swap for different modules. So if you had a certain kind of EQ, you could pull it out, swap it for another one of their EQs that fit that module type, and you'd be off and running. You'd have a customized console. Over time, API realized that these modules could be put into a format like this lunchbox, where you could take the modules out of a large format console and take them with you wherever you might want to go. So an engineer could take their mic pre's, their EQs, their compressors with them to another studio. Of course, lots of other companies saw this as an opportunity, and you have lots of companies that make 500 series modules now, from Neve to CAPI, which are DIY units. Radial makes reverb driver tanks. It's limitless how many modules there are today. Now, mind you, even though they're small, they are 100% professional. So it's just like the API console of the 70s and today. You can get an absolute professional quality sound using these modules, and if you have a good enclosure with a good power supply and good cabling and good modules, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to get high-end professional recording quality. So let's talk about the three things you should know when you're getting into the 500 series. The first thing is the rack enclosure itself. So we're going to talk in general terms about features and routing options, but to be able to see something, we brought this one here. This is the Trident Decadent. In this case, you have 10 slots across the front. There are different slot numbers depending on the enclosure that you purchase. It can be 8, I've seen 11, 6, 3. So you want to think about what kinds of modules and the way your workflow is going to kind of function for you to know how many slots you should pick up. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Another thing that the enclosure you want to consider is the features that it comes with, the internal routing options. So this one has some switches here, for example, that allow you to connect internally the first module to the second module, as opposed to hardwiring the output of one into the input of two. You can flip this switch and you can have the signal travel from card 1 to card 2. So for example, if you had a snare drum and you had a preamp on channel 1 and a reverb on channel 2 that you like with your snare drum, you can route it here and you wouldn't have to use a cable, and you get your output with the preamp and the reverb. There's other features that are included in different units, like for example, there is summing in some units where you can have the modules and you mix them together and you get an output left and right on the end. There's different features for different units. Typically, the basic functionality is cables coming in, the module slots, some internal routing where you can decide which ones go to which, and you can set stereo sometimes where you can say that two modules are a stereo unit. Cabling output and power is typically what you get. So this unit in particular has the cabling options are you get XLR out, XLR in, you get 1/4 inch in as well here. You also get DB25, which is the standard Tascam input and output, and that's an 8-channel in or out type of cable. That looks like the old printer cables. So this is a DB25. This would connect here, and this would break out into 8 XLRs or 8 1/4 inches, or in this case, you have DB25 to DB25, which would work fine if you had an interface that had a DB25 input. You could go directly out of here into your interface, and you wouldn't need a breakout cable. But since this does also have XLR and 1/4 inch, you could use regular XLR cables. So you could plug in an XLR input, and this could terminate out of another preamp. It could terminate on a patch panel. You also get a 1/4 inch input here, so you could plug in a guitar or a line input from a synthesizer or something like that, depending on the module you had there. This unit, this connector here is for the power. So one thing to consider when you're looking at 500 series is how is the power set up? Typically, any issues that we've encountered with 500 series enclosures has to do with the power. When you purchase a unit, a lower priced unit, it will come with a switching power supply. That power supply, if it isn't implemented right, can cause noise, high oscillations around 8K, 10K, 12K that you can't get out of your audio. It's just in there, and that's coming from the power supply. Now, not all switching power supplies are bad. If they're implemented well, like API implements it well, Neve implements it well, you don't have any problems. But if you ever hear noise coming out of your 500 series enclosure that's a high-pitched kind of oscillation, it can be the power supply. When you're purchasing one, make sure that you find out if it's a switching power supply or a linear power supply. If you have the choice, go with linear. If you have to do switching, it might be worth contacting the manufacturer and asking them about their power supply and issues like high-end oscillation. So this unit is an analog unit. We have analog ins, we have analog outs, but there are other types of units like by Cranborne that are digital units. They have optical in and optical out. That's so that your interface, if it has an ADAT optical out, you don't need to take up any of your A to D conversions or D to A conversions to use the unit. You can keep those for your conventional kind of recording, and now then use your digital input for 8 more, or 6 more inputs into your interface. Now, of course, the analog to digital conversion and the digital to analog conversion, when you're doing that, happens inside of the enclosure. So you want to make sure that you have one that speaks highly to the design around the A to D and the D to A conversion. Now, this unit is an off-the-shelf unit. There's lots of off-the-shelf units. This one is a Trident. Neve makes them. Heritage Audio makes them. Radial makes them. There's so many units that you can pick from, and you can spend days looking through videos on YouTube to find a good one that fits your feature set. But also don't forget that there are DIY enclosures. There's a couple companies that make them. One in particular is CAPI, which is Classic Audio Products of Illinois. They make a 500 series enclosure that it's well priced and it's got lots of features, and you get a linear power supply. So if you are able to solder or know somebody that does and aren't afraid of building your own kit, that might be the way to go. The second thing to keep in mind is the cabling. So typically these units do not come with any cabling. The only thing they come with is the unit itself and the power supply. That means that if your interface is XLR in or 1/4 inch in or DB25 in, you want to make sure that you purchase the cables that go with it. So a couple notes about cables, right? So there are very expensive cables by manufacturers like Mogami. They have features like low oxygen inside the cables to limit oxidation over time. Then there's budget cables made by companies like Seismic Audio. The price is low and they're still pretty good. We've used them here in our studio and haven't had a whole lot of issues with them. And there's all kinds of cabling in between, different features, different prices. The only thing that I would say is a no-no when it comes to cables is don't buy cables that are plastic tipped, that cannot come apart like this. You want your cables to be able to open and be repairable, because these cables, they're not cheap, whichever way you go. And if something happens with a cable that has a plastic coating here that you can't get to, you're either going to have to cut it and put one of these tips anyway on it, or throw it away. And so a $40 cable becomes garbage because you can't get to fixing it. And this is a very easy fix. You can do it with a soldering iron. A tech can do it really easily for you and cheaply, and your cables will last a long time because your studio is going to be filled with these. So if you're having to throw them out, that's not doing a good job around that. The only other thing to talk about with these units as far as cabling is make sure that you give yourself a little extra room. So let's say you purchase a cable that is supposed to span 6 feet from the 500 series to your interface. Get an 8-foot cable. Give yourself a service loop. In other words, you take the cable, you roll it up like this, and then put a tie on it, so that in case you one day in the future you move things apart by another foot, you're not 6 inches short and have to replace all your cables. The third thing you want to consider when looking at an enclosure is the modules themselves. So how many slots should you choose? This unit has 10 slots, right? Some units have 8, some units have 6, some units have 3. Single rack units will have 2. How many is right for you? Well, it depends on how you're going to use it now and into the future, how you're going to grow. There's a few typical uses of a 500 series rack. One common usage is you have modules that map directly to tracks in Pro Tools. So for example, let's say you had 10 units here. Each one of these went to a separate track in my DAW. So kick would be on 1, that would be track 1 in the DAW. Snare would be on 2, track 2 in the DAW. And in that case, if that's the way you want to use it, then the more the merrier, right? The more slots, the more channels you can get high quality preamps or EQs on. Another way that it's commonly used is as a channel strip. So you would have, so for example, let's say you were recording vocals, that was your main thing, and you knew your vocal needed a good preamp, a good EQ, and a good compressor. Well, that's 3 modules, right? And so you could do preamp, EQ, compressor, and that would be your main vocal channel. Then let's say you also you're going to be doing background vocals at the same time in the future, so you'd want a duplicate of that, a preamp, another EQ, and another compressor. In that case, your numbers is multiples of 3. So you would have, there are some units, like for example, the Radial Workhorse is a 6-pack. It's got 6 module, it's a 6 module slot unit. So you would, if that was what you were going to do, if you weren't going to grow any more than that, then that might just serve your purposes. So what about these enclosures? Which is the right one for you? Well, we can make some recommendations. The top shelf unit is made, in our opinion, our recommendation of a really great unit is made by Heritage Audio. It's the MCM 8.2. It's about $13.99. It gives you 8 slots and it gives you summing, high quality summing to a stereo output. So it's great for multi-tracking where you have your individual modules feeding your DAW. You can do channel strips, as we talked about, preamp, EQ, compressor, all the stuff that a regular enclosure will do, but it also will give you, each track will come out and mix into a stereo summing. So if you're interested in analog summing, that's a great unit to get because it does all of that. A cheaper unit, it's a bit more budget conscious, is this unit. This is $7.99. It's the Trident Decadent. It gives you 10 slots, simple routing options, it lets you chain the modules, XLR in, XLR out, and DB25 if you need it. A no-frills, great functioning unit is made by API themselves. It's an 8-slot 500 series unit, and that one goes for about $475. Now, if you're feeling like you want to do DIY and you're feeling like you want to build your own unit, you have 2 options that we really like. There is one by AML, that's Audio Maintenance Laboratories, and there's one here in the United States made by CAPI, Classic Audio Products of Illinois. You get 2, there's 2 kind of ways to go. You get the VPR rack, which is 11 slots, and you can get a budget switching power supply that's well implemented, and that's about $4.99. Or you can get the VPR 11 slot enclosure with a linear power supply that can power up to 2 of those enclosures for a total of $720. So there's lots of options, there's lots of ways to go. All the links to everything we've talked about to purchase, we're going to include them below. Go ahead and leave us notes. You feel free to contact us if you have any questions. We're going to talk more about modules, some more cabling in the future, so keep your eye out for that. And thanks for watching. Feel free to drop us any questions you have below. Please subscribe if you like this video. Thanks, guys.